10 most brutal exploitation movies of 1960s that got banned. What if I told you the 1960s weren't just flower power and free love, but something far darker? Beneath the technicolor surface of Hollywood glamour, filmmakers were cooking up celluloid nightmares so raw, so obscene, entire countries banned them outright. No safety nets, no MPAA guardrails, just blood, flesh, and fury. These weren't just movies. They were cinematic crimes. Are you ready to uncover the 10 most brutal exploitation films of the 1960s that got banned across the globe? Let's peel back the velvet curtain.
Love Camp 7, 1969.
If you think grindhouse cinema peaked in the 70s, think again. Love Camp 7 lit the fuse in 1969. Set inside a Nazi prison camp, two female agents go undercover, but what follows is 96 minutes of raw, relentless humiliation, sadism, and torture porn dressed up as a World War II mission. This wasn't just exploitation, it was the prototype for the entire Nazi-sploitation genre. Banned outright in the UK, Australia, and New Zealand, it was declared obscene and didn't see a proper home release in many places until decades later. What made it so radioactive? Maybe it was the thin veil of plot, a fake excuse for a non-stop stream of brutality and degradation. Even seasoned censors were stunned. One famously said, "It offends everyone," and they weren't exaggerating. Love Camp 7 wasn't trying to shock, it was built to. A low-budget time bomb that exploded in the face of every moral standard of the era. And the ripple effect? It birthed a subgenre of films that pushed the boundaries even further. Despite being nearly impossible to find for years, its legacy lived on in whispers, bootlegs, and the blood-stained lineage of exploitation cinema. It didn't just cross the line, it lit it on fire and dared the world to look away. Mondo Cane 1962. It looked like a travelogue, but hit like a fever dream. Mondo Cane 1962 wasn't just a documentary, it was a gut punch to global decency. Directed by Gualtiero Jacopetti and Franco Prosperi, the film stitched together scenes from around the world, tribal death rituals, animal slaughter, plastic surgery, and beachside grotesqueries. No narration to comfort you, just a haunting lounge soundtrack and the quiet horror of reality, unfiltered. It was banned in multiple countries and sliced to ribbons by censors and others. Why? Because it didn't blink. It showed people eating dogs in one scene, then sipping champagne in another. No line between savagery and civilization. It suggested that maybe we're all animals in suits. Yet somehow, Mondo Cane got an Oscar nomination for Best Song. Hollywood didn't know whether to reward it or recoil. And audiences? They packed theaters, jaws dropped, stomachs turning. Did you know this film invented a genre? Mondo film became shorthand for shockumentary, raw footage, real horror, all wrapped in exoticism. But none of the imitators had the same venom, the same voyeuristic precision. This wasn't entertainment, it was confrontation. Mondo Cane didn't just show you the world, it exposed the parts you weren't supposed to see. And once you've seen them, you don't unsee them. Blood Feast 1963. You're looking at the world's first true splatter film. Blood Feast didn't just flirt with gore, it dove face first into it. Directed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, the so-called godfather of gore, this 1963 grindhouse shocker follows a deranged caterer who slaughters women to serve as sacrifices to an Egyptian goddess. Plot? Barely. Butchery? Buckets of it. Filmed in just 9 days on a shoestring budget of $24,000, Blood Feast went on to gross over $4 million, a staggering return for a movie most theaters refused to touch. Cities banned it, censors panicked, and critics called it trash. One reviewer said it looked like it was shot through a jar of jam. But the crowds came anyway. Some fainted, others puked, most just stared, wide-eyed and horrified. Lewis knew exactly what he was doing, selling the shock, the spectacle, the taboo, and it worked. This wasn't horror with suggestion or suspense. This was meat, blood, and shrieking victims front and center. No metaphors, no apologies. Today, every modern slasher, gorefest, and red band trailer owes a little blood to Blood Feast. It wasn't art, it was carnage on celluloid, and it changed horror forever. Scorpio Rising 1963. Before punk. Before MTV. There was Scorpio Rising. Kenneth Anger's 1963 underground classic wasn't just ahead of its time. it detonated every cinematic rule it touched. Picture this: leather-clad bikers, Nazi flags, homoerotic close-ups, and Catholic symbolism, all cut to a jukebox of 50s rock and roll. Elvis meets Aleister Crowley in a neon-lit fever dream. The reaction? Explosive. In California, one screening ended with the entire print seized by police. Courts tried slapping it with obscenity charges. The church called it blasphemous. Mainstream theaters banned it outright, but underground circles declared it gospel. Scorpio Rising didn't just influence generations of filmmakers, it reshaped how film could be used as rebellion, ritual, and raw emotional assault. David Lynch, Martin Scorsese, even Nicholas Winding Refn, they all owe a piece of their visual language to Anger's 28-minute masterpiece. It's not a movie you watch, it's a movie that happens to you, loud, fast, and unapologetically queer. Anger didn't want to comfort, he wanted to provoke. And in doing so, he created a cinematic outlaw that still defies labels 6 decades later. Rebellion never looked so dangerous or so beautiful. Sadie. Come the Touch of Her Flesh, 1967. This one soaked in sleaze, stitched with sweat and vengeance. The Touch of Her Flesh. 1967 kicks off a twisted trilogy that grindhouse junkies still whisper about. The plot? A lingerie store owner catches his wife cheating, crashes his car in a blind rage, literally, and wakes up sightless, seething, and ready to cleanse the world of impure women. Spoiler: his method of purification involves knives, drills, and pure misogynistic madness. Shot guerrilla style in New York City on a micro-budget, the film was too toxic for mainstream distributors and too obscene for most small-town theaters. But in the back alleys of 42nd Street and sleazy midnight screenings across America, it found a devoted and disturbed audience. Part of what became known as the pornographic Psycho series, this flick set a blueprint for low-budget violence meets erotica films that didn't just walk the line, they cut it wide open. The lead actor? Forgotten. The character? Burned into the memory of every cult horror fan. It's not stylish, it's not smart, but it's relentless. A gutter-level masterpiece of moral decay that took its bans like badges of honor. You don't watch The Touch of Her Flesh expecting redemption. You watch it to see how far underground cinema was willing to crawl. Olga's House of Shame, 1964. Meet Olga, sadist, mastermind, queen of cruelty. Olga's House of Shame, 1964, wasn't just another cheap grindhouse flick. It was the sleazy crown jewel of the white slavery cycle. Shot in fake documentary style, the film followed a cold-blooded crime syndicate where women were lured, broken, and sold. No score, no sentiment, just raw, brutal indoctrination filmed with eerie calm. This wasn't sensationalism, it was simulation, and that's what terrified people. Police raided theaters in New York and Chicago, seized prints, prosecuted distributors, even hardened critics squirmed, not because of gore, but because of how calmly it delivered horror. The camera never flinched, and neither did Olga. Audrey Campbell's icy performance as the dominatrix ringleader made her an underground legend. She didn't scream, she commanded. No one's sure if she knew what she was stepping into, but she stepped hard. Her portrayal has since been dissected as accidental feminist rebellion and weaponized sexuality. Decades before that was a film school talking point. And here's the twist. While many exploitation films faded into obscurity, Olga's House of Shame endured. Bootlegs thrived. Midnight retrospectives re-emerged. Today, Olga's legacy lives on. Not in the mainstream, but in the shadows she helped define. This wasn't camp. It was control, and in exploitation cinema, no woman held it tighter than Olga. Naked Evil, 1966. It was supposed to be just another cheap British horror flick. Instead, Naked Evil, 1966, turned into a full-blown colonial nightmare. The plot? A group of Jamaican immigrants arrive in England, only to bring with them an ancient voodoo curse that turns them violent, murderous, and, of course, possessed. What follows is a foggy mess of tribal drums, exoticized mysticism, and every racial stereotype the post-empire mindset could conjure. Shot entirely in the UK but awkwardly trying to pass itself off as set in the tropics, the film plays like a propaganda reel disguised as horror. There's no nuance, no context, just paranoia soaked in pseudo-supernatural fear. And even in the 60s, that wasn't flying. Naked Evil was banned or quietly buried throughout the Caribbean and blacklisted in academic circles for its overt cultural offensiveness. Did it succeed as a horror film? Not really. But its impact? That's harder to shake. It helped usher in a wave of voodoo-themed horror where white anxiety took center stage and black characters were often portrayed as literal vessels of evil. Few defend it today, but many acknowledge it laid twisted groundwork for future films that at least tried to explore race with a little more depth. Think of it as the dark fossil buried beneath more thoughtful horror to come. A relic best left in the vault, but never entirely forgotten. Satan's Bed 1965. Before she broke up the Beatles, Yoko Ono took a detour into the gutter, cinematically speaking. Satan's Bed 1965 is a grime-soaked cocktail of sexploitation, drug dens, and revenge, shot in the back alleys and tenement corners of pre-gentrified New York. Part noir, part fever dream, it drags a group of women through the underworld of prostitution, addiction, and one of the seediest storylines ever stitched together on 16mm. The Catholic Legion of Decency branded it a moral abomination, and theaters that dared to screen it saw their reels confiscated. Critics refused to touch it. For decades, it was one of those titles whispered about by grindhouse obsessives and tape traders until the VHS underground gave it a second life. Yoko Ono's performance? Minimal dialogue, maximum presence. She floats through the chaos with an eerie calm, her quiet intensity making her stand out in a film otherwise drenched in noise and sleaze. It wasn't a breakout role, it was a cinematic ghost, and that's what makes it fascinating. Satan's Bed doesn't scream, it lingers. It's the kind of film that doesn't demand to be remembered, but refuses to be forgotten. A footnote in exploitation history, sure, but also a bizarre time capsule of pre-Beatlemania Yoko, back when the underground really was underground. The House on Bear Mountain 1962. This is what happens when you cross Playboy with Frankenstein. The House on Bear Mountain 1962 turns a finishing school into a peep show laboratory where a mad professor parades topless co-eds alongside bargain bin monsters. Dracula, Wolfman, the whole rubber suit menagerie. Ridiculous? Absolutely. But beneath the camp, there's a twitchy vein of voyeurism and gender panic that makes the jokes feel a little too sharp for comfort. Shot cheap and cheeky, the film was credited to Lloyd T. Binford, a wink of a pseudonym of director Lee Frost, nodding to the infamously prudish Memphis censor. Bob Kress shows up in drag as Granny Good, leering at the student body while the monsters mug for the camera. It's part nudie cutie, part Halloween spook show, and entirely a dare to the censors. Small-town boards branded it immoral. Drive-ins pushed it under lurid marquees, and police made surprise visits when the laughs got a little too naked. And yet, decades later, film scholars circle back to it as a curious artifact, a goofy skin flick that accidentally poked at American anxieties about bodies, desire, and who gets to look at whom. Is it trash? Oh yes, but it's the kind of trash that tells on the era that produced it. Sometimes the joke isn't funny until 40 years later. Shanty Tramp 1967. Shanty Tramp 1967 is the kind of film that grabs you by the collar, spits in your face, and dares you to keep watching. Set in the sweaty, bigoted underbelly of the American South, it follows a preacher's daughter, blonde, wild, and manipulative, who weaponizes her sexuality until it sparks a chain reaction of racial violence, rape, and revenge. Made on a shoestring budget by exploitation veteran Joseph G. Prieto, it was filmed in Florida with non-actors and zero shame. What it lacks in polish, it makes up for in raw discomfort. This isn't just a cautionary tale. It's an all-out moral collapse. Banned or quietly buried in multiple southern states, the film was deemed too incendiary for mainstream theaters. And for good reason. The race relations are radioactive, the portrayal of religion is scathing, and every character is neck-deep in hypocrisy. It's grim, brutal, and sweaty with sin. Less a movie, more a confession booth on fire. Critics dismissed it, but underground circles kept it alive. Today, it's seen as a blistering time capsule of America's darkest impulses, masked as pulp, but pulsing with ugly truths. Shanty Tramp didn't just offend, it exposed, and it still burns decades later. So now you know, behind the glossy posters and silver screen smiles, the 1960s hit a world of celluloid chaos. These weren't just movies. They were warnings, weapons, and whispered taboos passed around like contraband. Some vanished, some survived, and a few changed film forever. What other banned treasures still lie buried in Hollywood's backlot shadows? If you love diving into this dark reel, don't forget to hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe. And remember, this is the channel where the curtain never fully closes. Until next time, stay scandalous.